do have somebody signed in wishing to speak. Ms. McLaughlin will read our protocol for visitors.
Thank you, Mr. Steinle. The public comment section is time set aside for the community to speak directly to the Board of Education. Per policy 1510, each speaker is given 3 minutes. When called, please stand at the podium and state your name and address. Please be respectful in your comments and do not divulge any personal or confidential information. Also, under state and federal policy laws, we are unable to entertain any comments related to employee personnel information or any topic that may disclose information about specific individuals. On these matters, we ask that you go through the appropriate administrative channels. The board will listen to your remarks, but no action or discussion will take place at this meeting. Therefore, please do not expect us to respond tonight. We do have one visitor wishing to speak, Mrs. Jennifer McCann.
It's not Mrs., it's Ms.
Ms., sorry about that, Ms. Jennifer McCann.
My address is 51 on Park Boulevard. My name is Jennifer McCann. Although I probably don't need an introduction, for some of you, you know me, and some of you don't know me, but seem to know me even when I'm anonymous. I'm here to discuss the use of social media by employees and agents of the district. I ask you to consider the source as a parent, a former educator, a volunteer in the school district, a former school board member at another school, and an attorney. First, I would like to discuss FERPA, which stands for the Federal Education Records Protection Act. This briefly means that a school and its agents, which include school board members, cannot reveal confidential information about a student to unauthorized people. For example, like a Facebook moderator. So if hypothetically an agent of the school reveals information about a post which would identify a child and part of their school record, there may be a FERPA violation. A complaint to the Department of Education would be a great legal expense for the district, when simply not speaking out is so much less expensive. Secondly, while the school may limit some free speech of students, it cannot restrict the free speech of a parent in a public forum. Thus, if a parent posts in a public forum an issue of concern, like teacher bullying, which does occur in this district, the school or its agents may not act to suppress that speech, like asking a group moderator to take down the post. Thirdly, New York State has a very strong anti-SLAPP law. SLAPP stands for Strategic Lawsuit Against Public Participation. These are lawsuits that have no substantial basis in the law and are filed to silence people that criticize a public entity or a private entity regarding an issue of public interest, like school bullying. For example, filing or threatening to file a defamation lawsuit if a public post about a teacher bullying is not removed would violate this law. It would create a private right of a citizen to sue the school. Then there is defamation. First, defamation has a defense, and that defense is the truth. Emails and screenshots live forever. Therefore, an agent or representative of the school that states someone is lying when emails and records exist, to the contrary, or they state consider the source so as to impugn the person's character, that could be defamation. And again, that could be a very expensive lawsuit. I am almost done, and I know that was 3 minutes. Thank you. I suggest that the board authorize the spending of our tax dollars to get an education on these laws and the limits of the school and its agents' rights to quell free speech. I also hope that we've come to an understanding about what the school and its agents may or may not do regarding non-student speech in a public forum. If I need to come back about retaliation, we can discuss those laws later. Thank you.
Okay. Reports of boards and committee. I know we had a safety committee meeting.
Yes, our district safety committee met on November 8th. And as a reminder, this committee is comprised of district and building personnel, some parent representatives, safety personnel from Erie One BOCES, and the Amherst Police Department. We started the meeting with some updates for building-based teams with a reminder to continue reviewing and updating our safety planning document. Then we discussed the upgrades included in our upcoming capital project in regards to safety and security. We discussed usage of an interior door window cover, but samples will be ordered by Mr. Mercado and each building is going to try them out. We received a very thorough update from Mr. Valella on cybersecurity and a new committee that's going to be formed relating to those updates. And then we spent a good portion of our meeting reviewing threat assessment, best practices, materials, and articles with Mr. Bill Isle. There's going to be training for our new district level threat assessment team in early December, and this team will develop our overall threat assessment process, and a building-based team will be formed by that. That's it.
Thank you. Mrs. Golduck, I know you said you had an update for the legislature.
Yeah, so I attended the legislative dinner put on by ECASB last week, Thursday, and it was a really great program. There were a lot of legislators in attendance. I ended up sitting right next to Karen McMahon. Sean Ryan was not there. He was supposed to be there, but didn't show up. But there were different presenters who spoke to all the legislators about foundation aid and revisiting formula, unfunded mandates, the zero emission school buses, student mental health and wellness, school safety, and staffing, retention, and shortages. So there was a lot of information presented to the legislators. I saw Karen McMahon taking lots of notes. And you know, they all said at the end how important it is to know what the priorities are of the districts and be able to take that back, and also that, you know, districts should be reaching out directly to them to discuss specific things. I also attended the Windermere PTA meeting last night as the Board of Ed representative that I'm on their agenda every month. And it was really nice because they had the security officer, Mark DePiro, who's stationed at Windermere, do a little presentation for the attendees, and he talked about you know, what he does in the school, making connections with the kids. You know, it's so much more than security. He goes into the classes and reads books to them, and you know, has lunch with them in the cafeteria, and you know, in addition to viewing the cameras and walking the perimeter and checking the doors and, you know, conducting lockdown drills and things like that. So it was really nice to just hear from him presenting to the group. There weren't a ton of people there, but you know, there were some great questions for him as well. So it was nice.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? All right, then we'll turn over to the superintendent.
Okay, good. Thank you. It's that time of year where we get to kick off budget development season with sort of a wrap-up of last year and a look at our long-range plan as it relates to fund balance and reserves. So I'm pleased to welcome Mrs. Buzinski for season 7, episode 1 of budget development.
I forgot about that. We do have to do that. Okay. So this is our draft long-range reserve plan. So at this time of year, it gives us an opportunity to review each of the reserves that we have in place along with our fund balances. And then this is when we can decide what we want those levels to be, and it kind of drives some of our budgetary decisions going throughout the year. So we'll just review them one at a time. If we need to make any changes to that, or if the board wants to make changes to it, we'll make these changes on the draft, and then it will be presented to you for adoption at our next meeting in December. So this is all just one draft. So the first one is reserve for retirement contributions, and that is a reserve that we use to help offset ERS contributions for our non-teaching staff. So the benefit of having funds in this reserve in a year where maybe the contribution rate is increasing significantly, that would have a very negative effect on our budget, requiring large budgetary increases. We can allocate some of these dollars to our budget for that year to help smooth out that increase a little bit. So ideally, we would like to have about 2 years worth of retirement payments in this reserve. Our balance is just over $1 million, and 2 years of payments using the last 2 years would be about 1.2 million. So because the rate dropped in the last 2 years consecutively, it has gotten us closer to our goal. So we're really only about $200,000 away from that goal. Now that, of course, would shift if we had a year where the rate went up drastically, but that reserve is in a nice place. Similarly, its twin is the reserve sub-fund for retirements, which is our TRS reserve. So this was established as a new law in 2018 that districts were allowed to create this reserve. We are a few years into it now, so we are at the point where we're allowed to contribute 2% of our prior year TRS payments, or a maximum of 10%. So for the first 5 years, we have a maximum of 2%, then a maximum of 4%, then 6%. So we're at the 10% now. We haven't funded this fully every year, so we're not at the 10%, so we can still put in the 2%, which would be about $567,000 if we chose. Similar to the ERS contribution reserve, it's the same thing. If TRS spikes and it's going to be a large impact to our budget, we can use some of these dollars in budget development to help smooth those rising costs. We have about 1.6 million in there right now. We did contribute about 285,000 this past year. So our maximum that we're allowed to have is 2.2 million, which would be the increase of 567. Employee benefit accrued liability. So this reserve allows us to put funds away to cover our long-term liability for compensated absences. So every year during our external audit, we're required to compute what the cost would be if every employee needed to be paid out their accrued time, their vacation time, any benefits that they have that would need to be paid out. So this number's 3.769 million is right out of our audit. That's calculated on all of our employees. Our funding is $1.5 million. So we're significantly short if we were going to be 100% funded. We're currently about 40% funded, but the likelihood that we would ever need to pay out everybody all at once is very, very slim. But that is a general rule of thumb that the controller would like to see that liability fully funded. That would be a significant increase for us, about $2.2 million. The unemployment insurance reserve. So we are self-funded with unemployment insurance, so we do not have policies that cover this. If we have employees who leave our employment with the district, if they're eligible for unemployment insurance, we pay those claims directly. So we don't have insurance for that. We ideally would like to have about 10 years worth of billings. In the past, this number was about $283,000, but over the last handful of years, that number has dropped significantly. So now our 10-year total is about $75,000, which is very, very much reduced. Our balance in the reserve is about $496,000. So this is one of the reserves that if the board chose, we could reduce that. It would be a board resolution, and then those funds would return to general fund, and we would then have the ability to allocate them to a different reserve if we chose. My recommendation would be to make those decisions over time and not just wipe it all out at once, maybe do a $200,000 reduction. It would still leave us $296,000 in the reserve, but would be more in line with past expenses. Our tax tertiary reserve is in place to allow us to cover claims for tax cert proceedings when taxpayers want to challenge the assessment on their property. Depending on the timing of it, there could be times where the district would be required to provide refunds to homeowners if the assessments are reduced after their taxes have been paid. So we calculate every year what our maximum liability is based on current cases for both SCARS and Article 7s, which is SCARS are homeowner properties and Article 7s are typically corporate properties. Currently, our liability is about $106,000. The Tax Cert Committee has done a great job in the past handful of years getting many of our large cases settled in conjunction with the town and the county. So our reserve in the past needed to be much higher. However, there is an upcoming reevaluation with the town of Amherst. I don't know exactly when that's going to be, but when we had a reeval in the town previously, we had a significant number of cases of homeowners trying to have their assessments reduced. So it would be our recommendation to maintain that balance that we have in the reserve, which does cover just about 110% of our liability. But we do anticipate that the number of cases that we have in the upcoming years are going to increase significantly.
Mrs. Blazinski, this might be something that you can put on the back burner, or maybe you know the answer now. In the event that we have not allocated money from this reserve into our budget development process, but we have a payment that's required that would apply to this reserve, are we able to make the payment out of this reserve and increase our appropriation, or do we have to appropriate from this reserve proactively during the budget development process?
We do a little bit of both. We currently appropriate about $60,000 every year from this reserve into our budget to help support the expenditure side of it. But expenses coming out of this reserve do close to the reserve. So we would need to make some budget transfers to get the money into the right code. But when we close our books, the expenses would fall into that reserve. So it's a little bit of both on that one. Capital Reserve 2017, I left this one on just to show that the final transaction happened and this reserve is now closed. It was established with a $500,000 limit, and that limit was fully funded and fully expensed. So once the ceiling of the capital reserves are met, you can't put any more money into it, even if you've expensed some of it. So it was fully funded at $500,000. It was included in the resolution that we put before our voters in December of 22 last year for the capital project, and they authorized us to expense the full amount and put it towards the new capital project. So this reserve will close, and then next year it won't be on this report anymore, but I left it on just for this year to show that that final transaction did happen and that reserve is closed. We also had established a Capital Reserve 2021, which had a $10 million ceiling with a 10-year lifetime span. Same purpose, only for the use of capital funds, capital construction, and needs to be authorized by our voters in order to use it. At the time of our vote, we had $2 million in this reserve. So the voters did authorize us to use that. So that balance is now zero because those funds have been moved over to our capital fund. And now this reserve is only eligible to receive another $8 million. So the recommendation would be to increase the reserve up to, the ceiling of that $8 million for a future capital project.
So, just a question. So, it's for a future capital project, we couldn't use it for what we're currently involved.
Correct. The money has to be in the fund at the time you present your vote to the voters for approval of a capital project. And the language in the resolution for the capital project specifically calls out the reserves and the dollar amounts that are in the reserves to be applied towards the construction costs, which is why you're not allowed to use monies that aren't there yet. So that reserve is at a zero balance, but it is open and available to us for the next 6 years to fund for a future project. It has a 10-year lifetime, a 10-year lifespan, so as soon as, that time comes up, we would either need to expense the money if there's money in it and then close it, or if it's still at zero, just close it. And then if the board chose and wanted to move forward, we would put a new resolution on with our budget resolution for vote for the voters to authorize a new capital reserve.
Can you go back to the expiration?
We established it in 2021.
Is it through the end of that year, like June 30 of 31?
I don't know if that would be the 30th, June 30th, or May 18th. I would have to,
Right. So we have until 2031.
yes.
Okay.
Because the end of this year to 24, also 7 years.
7
Yeah.
years. Okay.
Okay, so those are all of our reserves. In addition to reserves, even though our fund balance isn't necessarily a reserve, we have them on here just so that we can monitor them and track them throughout the year and we don't lose sight of them. Our first one is unassigned fund balance. So these are funds remaining at the end of the year or carried over from prior years when we have excess revenue or have not spent our full allocation on the expenditure side. This is the fund balance that is limited to 4%. We were over that 4% this year by 0.87. So our actual balance is $3.6 million. And our goal will be to get back down to 4% this upcoming year. The 3.1 million is just an estimate because it's 4% of next year's budget. So I just assumed a 3% increase in budget, but that number will flex and adjust based on budget development. So that would be a decrease of just over $500,000. Assigned fund balance is monies that we use during budget development to support our expenditure budget. And it includes appropriated fund balance as well as carryover purchase orders. So each year, for the past couple of years, we've allocated $1 million of our fund balance to support our expenditure budget and our revenues. And then we also had almost $789,000 of funds that were on purchase orders in the prior year. And for what various reasons, those POs weren't closed. Either the funds or the materials that we were purchasing weren't received yet, or services that were in progress weren't yet completed, so the payments weren't made. So we carried forward the POs into the next year so that those funds can still be expensed without affecting the subsequent year budget. So this year our appropriated fund balance is 1.7 million, which includes that 1 million that we discussed in budget development plus the carryover POs. We also have a small debt service fund. The debt service is restricted fund balance, and it is derived from premiums that we received on bond borrowings from our previous capital project. So we have about $300,000, and we have allocated about 120 of that in this year's budget. So we will use that, and then the balance of it will be planned for next year to help lower our tax cap during budget development. And then that will be closed, and we won't need our debt service fund again unless we have additional proceeds from bonds in the upcoming project borrowings. And then finally, we added this year. As I'm sure you all recall, we promised our voters that we would contribute $3.2 million of other available funds to our capital project to help reduce the local share. So we wanted to make sure we were tracking that and being very transparent with that, where we were with the status of that and how that was coming along. So it was in December of 22 that we had that authorization from our voters for the $3.2 million. We contributed $900,000 this past year, which wasn't planned because during the project year, our budget had already been established, but we were able to kind of get a jump start on those contributions. And we moved $900,000 over into capital fund. So we had a remaining balance for contributions of $2.3 million. And then the remaining 4 years, we have to get the rest of that. So the 575 is just an estimate. We divided that balance by 4. As we approach June of this year, if we can put more in, we will, and it'll just reduce the numbers that we need to come up with in subsequent years. But this will be a way for us to track it and not lose sight of it so that we're all on the same page and know exactly where we are.
And when we picked June 30th, 2027 for the target date of having the 3.2, is that based on when we anticipate going to bond on the project or the project concluding?
That's when we anticipate the project being concluded and our final payments are needed. So we will be borrowing $3.2 million less than what we really need. So by the time we have to make those last payments, we have to have that 3.2 million in place.
Thank you. Just another quick question. So for the reserve that you recommend a decrease for, and then for example, a reserve that we recommend an increase for, like a tax cert reserve in anticipation of a reeval, what is the mechanism for moving that from one reserve to another?
Just board resolutions. The board would deem the unemployment reserve overfunded and it would be reduced and the funds would be returned to general fund, which will then make us have too much money in general fund, and then we do a resolution to fund a reserve.
Like at year end?
Yes.
So that's something to keep our eyes on, if that is the path we want to go.
And we could leave the money sit there, we could reduce it that amount, a different amount, like, these are just recommendations and, kind of thoughts for the future that help us, as we develop next year's budget, look at what we want to appropriate as the information comes in on what contribution rates are going to be for ERS and TRS, like all of that plays into the usage of these funds. Are we happy with these recommendations? Do we want anything changed, or are we comfortable with this becoming our actual document and going on the next board agenda?
As you said, we're not doing anything till year end anyways, correct?
Yeah, no decisions
is
on
just more
movement
of
of
our
money,
plan.
this is just kind of like a plan.
Everybody good?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. So we will, we'll switch this over to actual and then, it'll be on your next agenda for approval. And then it goes on the website, all that fun stuff.
Thank you. Nice job. That's the only item for the superintendent's report tonight.
All right, then we will need a motion for new business items.
I'll make a motion for new business items E1, A through M, 2A through E, and 3C and D.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor of new business items E1, A through M, 2A through E, and 3C and D, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Ms. Custodi, do we have any follow-up action items?
I just, excuse me, wrote down, when is the actual 2021 capital reserve expiration date?
Okay.
If you want,
Oh,
because you asked if it was May or June.
yeah. I mean, just when we're looking at our capital planning to know whether a new reserve would be needed for a subsequent project or if that one is still useful,
You
especially.
can insert it into the document then.
Yeah. Especially if we're going to fund it, I don't wanna fund it and then not be able to use those funds. But if we anticipate a vote prior to 2031, then that one will be sufficient.
So you'd like the actual date inserted into the document?
Yeah.
All right. We will need a motion to convene to executive session then.
I'll make a motion to convene to executive session to discuss matters regarding employment of a particular person and negotiations with Amherst Lunch Employees Association and Amherst Cook Managers.
We have a second, Mr. Velo. All in favor of convening to executive session, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries 6-0. Thank you, everybody, for coming.